What's happening, everybody? Happy February 1st, the first day of Black History Month. And we got history, we're going to have history, and we got a future. So in spite of the fact that that orange person wants us not to acknowledge Black History Month, we can do it ourselves. And we do have a lot to celebrate. As the people who actually built this country, we can look back on what went well, what didn't go so well. But what we do know is we did a lot to create America. And right now, I must admit, we're sitting back a little bit after trying to save it and watching folks just kind of scramble around to try to figure out how they keep the democracy intact. And we're taking a little bit of a time out. We'll be back, but we need a minute. So right now, what we're doing is celebrating us and figuring out how to safeguard us. So I want to introduce you to somebody today. His name was Winford Tillman Tucker, and he was my great-grandfather. My great-grandfather was a very interesting character. He was the son of two folks who had been enslaved, Simon and Martha Ann Tucker. And his father had been marched during slavery as a 6 or 7 year old out of Northeast Kentucky all the way to Columbus, Mississippi, where he was sold for $800. He later went over to Bexar, Alabama, where he was enslaved until, as my great-grandfather used to say, my father turned 21, the year of freedom. And so he left that community, went over the line into Mississippi and settled in an area near Smithville, Mississippi, where he married and raised his family. And so my great-grandfather was, obviously his son. And I want to talk a little bit about what his life was like. He had 7 kids. He divorced when the children were very small. That's a whole nother story in itself. But his mom stayed there and helped him. He later remarried, and my great-grandmother helped to raise his children. But what's interesting about him is education-wise, he had an 8th grade education. He started in preschool at 4 years old. And I know all of this, not only from the family stories, but because he was interviewed by the Mississippi Archives. And so all of this stuff is I have pictures of that interview. I have the tape of that interview, and I have the document, a 31-page document. So it was a lot of stuff we knew, but I now have it in his own voice, which is really cool. Anywho, he went to school, graduated 8th grade, and was just super smart, very proud of his education and of his religion. He was Church of Christ elder and just a solid guy. He ended up opening a sawmill. And when he describes how he worked, it was crazy to me. He had this big mill, this big blade thing that he would manually pull these trees through. And he said there were days that they cut 10,000 pieces of wood that was used to build the new houses in the area and what other buildings that need to be built. And at any given time, you could still drive through parts of Amory, Mississippi, and Aberdeen and those areas. And some of those old buildings, I'm sure, still contain wood that was cut at my great-grandfather's mill. In addition to that, and raising kids and being married and having this amazing singing voice that he traveled with and taught singing, he also had a massive farm and a lot of fruit and vegetables. And as a wee one, I would go to that place and they put me out there in the corn and never see me again because I was so little I couldn't see over it. But he retired shortly after. I was a little girl and came to live with my grandparents. But what's remarkable to me is that he was well paid for that work. He was not just selling to Black folks. He was selling to folks all around. And I'm just trying to figure out what kind of agreement they had that kept him alive. For him to make that much more money than poor farmers, it must have been interesting and a delicate kind of balancing act that he had to have in order to do that. Not only did he do that, at one point while he was at the mill cutting wood, he cut his arm off right about here. He was in his 40s. And so I never knew him with that arm. And he, after it healed, he folded his shirt back up and he went back to work. And he continued to work and stay on his farm and he was in his 80s before he moved in with my grandmother. But there are remarkable historic folks who may not have been on the news, who may not have been written about, but they were in communities that sustained and nurtured us and made it possible for the generations of us to do what we've been able to do later on. So I hope he'd be proud of me. And I'm certainly thankful to him. So let's share our own histories this month. Let's tell our own stories. Let's use our gift of oration to share with others about who we are and what we're about, our value systems, and how with our hands we built this country, and we will not be erased.